Hello, everyone. This is Sundar Somasundaram coming to you live from LinkedIn. Super excited to be hosting this event. I know that supply chain is top of mind for everyone. So, we have a really great agenda today to talk about. We're going to be covering a few things. We're going to be talking about challenges in the supply chain ecosystem. This really is a session on the practical uses of IoT in supply chain. So we're going to be reviewing some of that. We're going to be looking at leveraging the data and the automation aspects of IoT in supply chain. And lastly, we're going to be reviewing some use cases and practical uses that impact, especially in the supply chain industry. Anyway, this is an interactive session, so please do post your questions in the comments. I'll now introduce our speakers, Paula and Steve. Paula, please go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Sundar. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks so much for inviting me. Hello to everyone out there. My name is Paula Natoli, and I'm part of the industry solutions team at Google Cloud. My area of focus is everything supply chain and logistics, cutting across absolutely all industries. My background is I've spent my entire career in enterprise supply chain software, so always at that intersection of supply chain and technology. And of course, IoT plays a critical role there. And Sundar, as you mentioned, we're not short of talking about supply chain challenges. So looking forward to the conversation.
Awesome. Thank you. Steve?
Hi, I'm Steve Slater, based in Waterloo, Ontario. I'm VP of Operations and Supply Chain for North America for IMS. IMS is a key player in the connected vehicle data industry with specialties in telematics and data services, supporting personal and commercial lines UBI, as well as through fleet and stolen vehicle recovery in partnerships with many of the world's top brands in the daily rental marketplace. Our mission statement is to make the road safer, smarter and greener. I myself come from a finance and accounting background, but have transitioned my eye for process and key unit economics into a more operational focus, where thankfully I get to make things happen rather than simply telling somebody what they just did. I'm honoured to join this conversation today to add some of my IMS experiences to some everyday use cases.
Awesome. All right, let's jump into it. I wanted to start with really talking about the supply chain crisis that we all saw last year at the Port of LA. What you're seeing right now is actually a picture taken off the Port of LA sometime early last year, showing about 70 plus ships waiting to dock at the LA port. This was obviously covered across the news, 60 Minutes, NBC, everybody did a segment on this. It massively impacted the entire supply chain industry, impacted the e-commerce industry, impacted multiple verticals overall, right? A number of reasons that they actually cited for this was actually that, it was COVID demand and, the supply chain systems really couldn't keep up. But, if you actually dig deeper into what caused this, the first thing was obviously the ships were waiting to unload at this Port of LA. If you actually have to get to the Port of LA, you actually have to go around, Oakland. And they actually had plenty of docking space there, but none of these ships could really unload there. And when you kind of dig around and ask why, it was because the systems are not set up to receive those containers in Oakland. This industry is still so old. They still use, everything is sort of paper based. Nothing is really completely digitized, right? So if you go beyond that, okay, great. So yes, they couldn't unload in LA. Now they're waiting in off the port of LA, trying to unload. And they said, well, why can't we just get these containers? What's really the blockage? Well, they said that the containers that are already on the dock ships couldn't be unloaded. Well, why are these containers not unloaded? Well, it's because there are a number of containers that have already been unloaded and the trucks have not shown up to pick these containers up, right? Well, why have these trucks not shown up? Well, because these trucks have empty containers sitting on them and nobody wants to be able to, take them back, right? So it's this whole circular thing that when it exponentially just added up and caused the entire supply chain crisis, right? And it's just goes to show how disconnected each of these systems are, that added up to something that was really impacting the entire world. So, from an IoT perspective, if these systems had been enabled, and we're seeing this across the board, right? Recently, we saw the meltdown that Southwest had. Now, that's not necessarily related to supply chain, but it's a great example of how when your systems are not automated and you have an event that happens and the systems can no longer just use their normal processing, right? You have, the systems are not automated. So now you have things that are breaking, and then it just, the whole system just implodes, right? So with IoT, we've actually seen this. We worked with a number of customers. A simple example is where they actually have devices that are connected to these containers that can then plug that data from an ecosystem perspective into the trucking company that's going to come and pick these containers up, right? And just as one stat, to unload a single ship, you need about 8,000 trucks, right? So that's how massive this these things can be. So anyway, in terms of these systems communicating with each other, we have customers that leverage tracking devices that go on the side of these containers that then push the data into these trucking companies, into their systems, that are then able to automatically schedule that truck to come and pick up that container, right? Or if for whatever reason there's an issue there, they can then communicate back into the port to say this pickup is not going to happen, and then the port can decide not to unload those containers and prioritize others, right? So this whole ecosystem could actually be automated from an IoT perspective, and we're still at the very sort of the tip of the iceberg in terms of automating these systems. And in the next few years, as we see more and more IoT devices get embraced across the industry, we're going to see more of that, right? So that's the first part. The second part is really around the data, and I'm going to hand it to Paula to talk about the impact of just data and how useful that is from a supply chain perspective.
Yeah, so Sundar, I think an example that you had there earlier, let me just tie back into that before I drive directly into the data piece. But when we think about that example, like you said, the Southwest meltdown, and it might not have been IoT, but I think we can garner a lot of similarities, whether we look at it in that lens or through a different lens. I actually was in California a couple weeks ago and had a similar situation of a delay from a different airline, only to finally look to board however many hours later. And while everyone was waiting to board, the announcement came on of, sorry, we're canceling the flight because we cannot find a pilot. So now that being said, you kind of look at it and you say, well, if we only had visibility, right? And in the world of supply chain, everyone's talking visibility right now. So if I could get that visibility, with that visibility comes clarity, right? With clarity comes information. And with information comes better decision-making. So whether we're applying that concept to that example about the airline and talking about disconnected systems, or we now go and apply it to the world of supply chain and IoT in general, I think they both apply. So I think what you mentioned there was a really great example. So now let me take it further and say, okay, it's all about data. And in the world of supply chain, we are not short of data. Actually, I don't think we have a data problem. We have a data usability problem, right? And so I think this graphic shows a little bit about what organizations face when they look at it through the lens of supply chain. So whether we're talking about this now in the logistics industry, or we look at it through the shipper's lens who were awaiting all those containers, right? We can look at it in that capacity as well. But the fact of the matter remains, we have a ton of data, and it's distributed across many different systems. So in that regards, we might be looking at a TMS system. We might be looking at a warehouse management system. that same shipper is going to have a forecasting system to be able to forecast their demand by which that product sitting in a container off the port is going to fulfill.
Mm-hmm.
Right? But it's not just the internal data. We're part of a community, right? Sundar, you mentioned this. It's a huge network, whether we're looking at it through the logistical lens of the ocean vessel coming in and having to coordinate with the truckers to be able to pick it up and deal with it around the yard. Well, we got to connect all of those. But then tie in, what about weather? Right? When we have some issues there, that's going to impact the ability to offload those containers. It's going to impact demand all the way downstream. So we have a ton of data. The question is, how do we start to connect it? How do we organize and orchestrate it into something meaningful that can go back to helping us make better decisions?
Makes sense.
So I guess the question is then, so how do you do that, right? And I think the lens that we look at it from a Google Cloud perspective is indeed, it's all about the data. And the IoT piece of it is one aspect that needs to tie into that big, broad ecosystem of data. So if we try to corral all of those data signals coming from 3 different segments, number one is being a private segment of data, and that's all the data that any one organization owns first party. Number 2 is that community segment. And Sundar, I think a lot of these points, when we think through the lens of IoT devices, that data could be owned by somebody else, but boy, could it be a signal of visibility to any node in the network to make better decisions. So it's part of a community set of data. And then there's all that public data, weather, news, traffic, heck, even Google search trends at some point can fall into that. But then it's all of that public data as well. So tying that all together really allows you to create a digital representation of the physical supply chain.
So would you say, Paulo, then, at least from what I have seen in the industry, I would say a lot of them are just kind of focusing on the private segment of data, and they're more insular looking, right? Actually, this is a really great slide, and it kind of talks about the community and the public. And given how tied in the supply chain networks are across the ecosystem, it's actually, they're not necessarily tapping into any of that.
Well, I think it's at different points in time. I think there's problems and challenges that each organization faces, and that's within their own private data to start, right? A lot of times you look at it and you say, well, how do I expand and grow in terms of excellence in my supply chain? And part of it is, well, let's make sure we clean up our own house first, right? Going back to the point of visibility. How do I even achieve visibility of inventory in from a shipper's lens that is already within my own network? Right. And I need to connect multiple systems in my own wheelhouse to do that first. So I think sometimes, Sundar, it's a matter of where can you start and kind of pick off the lowest hanging fruit to solve that problem. But to your point, the bigger challenges and frankly, the bigger opportunities come when you think outside of that box.
Right. And is this public segment data today, would you say it's clean data is available for enterprises to be able to leverage and use in their supply chain systems, or do they still have to stitch multiple data sources to get into that?
Yeah, it's a combination, right? And I think you have, if you look in the terms of visibility, right, there are organizations and companies that focus solely on helping to pull all that together, through the lens of supply chain related visibility, whether that's coming from the ocean side, whether it's coming from more of a domestic trucking side, et cetera. So organizations have formed entire businesses with the sole purpose of helping to stitch that together and making it easier for a logistics company or for a manufacturing company or a retail company to take advantage of it. So I think there's a lot of movement in that direction to organize and orchestrate it and make it easier and frankly, in some regards, faster to be able to access it and then turn it into something of an actionable insight.
Got it. Okay. I think we heard sort of the impact of IoT from sort of enabling devices communicating across the ecosystem. I think Paula went into details in terms of the data, really great sort of insights in terms of not just looking at it from one facet, right? And kind of taking that community and that public view. Steve, why don't you walk us through, some practical use cases in terms of what you've seen from a, supply chain and IoT perspective?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Sunday. Just to echo, I think it's fair to say anyone involved in supply chain over recent times has faced a number of new realizations. Things like how many intricate things knit together to make a whole. It's a great chart you put up there, Paula, that helps to emphasize all those different pieces that tie together. But also some other unexpected things or unusual things that came to the fore as well. Changes to standard operating models that had, significant impacts into areas of the supply chain that you previously thought to be super safe. The growth of the home deliveries, for example, was in part blamed for sudden shortages of paper and board products, which meant that cardboard boxes were much harder to get hold of, and things like that. There's so many things that are tied together. And Sunder, as you flagged from the beginning, how much of a vicious circle we all face if one part of that chain fails. So you can never rest or lose focus on the whole chain, or else one part of it will result in a significant collapse. But thinking a little bit more about your initial story there, Sunder, made me think about how IMS itself deploys IoT solutions to support confidence into the supply chain for our customers. Let's think about the part of the story where the trucks didn't show up at the port. And Sunder, you've already flagged a few points here, but looking a bit deeper into this particular issue, started to think about what else could be the problem and what IoT solutions were available to prevent this. So the first thing that sprung to my mind, what if the vehicle had broken down on its way to the port? What could be done to limit this likelihood? So at IMS, part of our IoT suite of products includes OBD devices plugged directly into your vehicle diagnostic port. When configured correctly, the device is capable of advising the fleet manager of any faults or concerns arising directly from the vehicle itself. These diagnostic codes, when used correctly, allows for preventative, proactive maintenance to be carried out on the vehicle to avoid or minimize future downtime. The second thing that sprung to mind, a bit more out there, but what if the driver and vehicle had been involved in an accident? An accident in itself is not only costly in terms of downtime of the vehicle and possibly its driver too. Let's not forget the human involved in this process as well. But the cost to repair, the insurance premium, etc., they all become a big issue to contend with. And what's more prevalent in recent times is that a major contributor to accidents has been the increase of distracted driving behaviours. Using IoT technology, we're able to monitor driving behaviour to alert and feedback on many of the contributory factors that lead to accidents themselves. We can instigate programs for driver improvement and things like that simply by being connected to the driver and the way that they're performing with the vehicle in their hands. But it's also fair to say any accident is not always your fault. So for that, we implement crash detection, crash reconstruction capabilities, again, all through a series of IoT connected solutions to ensure that the right culprit is brought to account. And then maybe drawing a little bit more on some more of my UK experience in the daily rentals marketplace. What if the vehicle had been stolen? So without IoT solutions in play, this is pretty much a total loss. However, through a sophisticated series of IoT services, we're able to detect when a vehicle is stolen, geofencing, alternate devices that are covert fitted to the vehicles. We're then able to track it whilst alerting the authorities. We have numerous instances where we've tracked through multiple police forces throughout the UK. And on many occasions, we recover the vehicle before it's been broken into parts to fuel the black market. So there are a number of reasons or examples where we can exaggerate the vicious circle. late maintenance leads to higher costs for spares. Wouldn't it be ironic if the spares that were required were actually on one of those containers in the port waiting to be offloaded? Ironic, but a reality based on where we've been with supply recently. Poor driving itself leads to high insurance costs, higher fuel costs, more wear and tear on the vehicles themselves. And so the threat grows because the combination of these factors have, in a number of instances, resulted in the collapse entirely of the freight company itself. So all these things are completely connected to each other and keep fueling that vicious circle.
Have you seen any sort of, are you guys already looking at, for example, leveraging IoT, the device detects something happens and notifying the larger ecosystem at play? So for example, I was talking to a customer that's in the logistics industry, and they basically had a system where, they're loading sort of docks at the warehouse. They wanted to be, super optimized. So they actually, as soon as a truck would enter a geofence, they would automatically send a work order to the warehouse to say, get this loading dock ready. This truck is in this radius, right? And in the next 30 minutes, it's going to be in here. Have you guys seen stuff like that?
I mean, with regard to the technical geofences, and less so with regard to the cargo offloading and things like that, but they are very real and very practical applications for that sort of service. But one of our major things, with the UK being the island that it is, and with access to mainland Europe being so straightforward, our geofences help to protect vehicles that shouldn't be leaving the country from actually boarding, cross-channel ferries and things like that. So it helps us to prevent those sorts of things. But other areas where the geography is really important, we see in use in commercial lines insurance, whereby a driver is not supposed to cross state lines. Mm-hmm. So we use that for the proof of underwriting that helps to make sure the insurance premium is retained. So it's all super ultra connected in all these different ways. One other aspect that we've come to support more recently is the whole growth of the gig economy as well. These part-time drivers who want to just do a few deliveries here and there or a few pickups.
The on-demand, yeah.
All the on-demand stuff. So by using our IoT capabilities, we're now able to register drivers for on-demand commercial lines insurance to protect them whilst they're using their own vehicle, so that they're able to perform those functions that otherwise would have been so cost prohibitive not very long ago. I remember once upon one day just taking some checks to the bank in my finance days. I used to have special premium attached to my insurance policy because on occasional corporate business. Mm-hmm. Well, this would have just completely roadblocked any of this gig economy, these occasional drivers that, without them, where would we be without the parcel deliveries? But the other obvious one, the ability to be able to track our driver when he's on his way to our house on a Friday night with our favourite takeaway. Again, it's another IoT application. It's supply chain of a different sort. But without that takeaway, my kids would certainly go hungry.
Okay. Steve, I think you're making some really valid points. And if I could expand upon one of them, I think, or maybe 2 points here. One, you talked a little bit about the preventive maintenance, right? I mean, we look at that through the lens of logistics. But of course, the IoT aspect of that can hit many different areas across an integrated supply chain. And that could be even within a company's own four walls. So we can take that same concept and apply it into the manufacturing facility and thinking about the equipment, right? No one wants downtime. So how do you handle that correctly, predict what that might be, and properly schedule that preventative maintenance and keep things moving, right? So we have multiple aspects where that same use case can be applied across the supply chain. And second, talking a little bit about these examples of where something is, whether it's the container, whether it's the truck, whether it's your takeout that you want to make sure your family gets in time. in some situations, it's not just about where something is, but also what is included on that truck. So this goes back to the examples earlier of that container, Sundar.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just a matter of where it is, but what's really on it, right? And now you're looking at it through the lens of how granular can we get with pegging into that through an IoT lens, because what's on it can then trickle down and make totally different decisions for somebody who's waiting for that product. They might look, if something's going to be delayed, they might make different decisions about redeploying inventory elsewhere. Or if I'm a retailer waiting for that and it's not showing up, well, I might be changing my pricing and promotion strategy accordingly to balance supply and demand when it actually isn't imbalanced. So, Steve, I think you're making some really great points there.
Yeah, I saw an interesting stat. Over 92% of the containers that are out there are still not tracked. They are tracked on paper systems. I mean, if you look at the freight industry as a whole, they still use like Viking English, right? Bill of lading or something like that, like instead of just the receipt, right? So it's just amazing, and even now, when we get IoT products from other countries, I realize that it has to go through like 15 different hands, right? The companies just getting it through that supply chain, and it's just amazing how many of these things are still so disconnected. All right, I think we have some questions coming in from the audience. So anyway, if for others that are watching this, please do feel free to post your comments and in the comments tab in LinkedIn, and they're going to show up here, and we will take them one at a time. So why don't we go with this first one here? This one is: do you see other ways for system integrators and maintenance and repair operations teams to utilize the data? Steve, why don't you start with this, and then I'll have Paula chime in, because I think you have worked with a number of SIs in the past, and especially given your kind of take on the maintenance and the predictive maintenance aspect of this. What's your take?
Sure, I see that there's thousands of ways for integrators to work. We ourselves have looked at this with regards to just getting our engineers to be able to attend the appropriate vehicle at the appropriate time to fit the hardwired box to the vehicle. But outside of that, we've come across numerous applications where connecting the route to the map, to the workload, to the regular schedule for these things, they're all possible. And I think one of the main things that I've found personally is that sometimes you can get trapped in looking for the particular language that fits with the way that you refer to the tools or the function itself. But it doesn't take too much for you to dig into some other systems, perhaps using slightly different terminology, but who all meet those requirements for better integration. We've seen a number of them tied into ERPs, into basic accounting package tools as well, and just into some basic route planning items as well. So the possibilities are endless, and there are many sources out there that are already tying a lot of these things together.
And Paula?
Yeah, I'll add 2 points to that. One, I think, is when we look at it, I'm going to backtrack a little bit. Tying it all together impacts not only that example of MRO, right? I want to be able to properly align timing, labor, and I have to have the equipment and the inventory necessary. So I can utilize that same information to now sprinkle even AI into some of that, which is going to lead towards the predictive side of the house. Think of that going upstream to ensure I have proper inventory planning, I have proper labor scheduling. So I look at it it's not just the here and now and being able to get a better signal of what I need to do here and now, but how do I now utilize that across the entire ecosystem that includes a lot of people, places, and things at the same time?
Got it. Yeah. So, from my perspective, definitely systems integrators, maintenance and repair. I think from an ecosystem perspective, again, like I said, right, it's not just, and I think Paula made a really great point about this. It's not just about, hey, where's my container? It's also about what's in it. What do I need to do with that data, right? And that definitely feeds into the larger ecosystem of, the fleet, what's happening with those vehicles, to what Steve said, and to, there's no one company that's going to be able to stitch all of this data together, across the board. So you absolutely have to have systems integrators that are tying in these systems and exposing this data. All right.
And Sundar, one other point to that, like you said, the help necessary to stitch it all together, right? It's not just a technical effort, but now you're getting into semantics as well. When you think about how each piece of information is sourced, their definitions, et cetera. So that semantic of tying it together to turn it into something that can be actionable plays a critical role in that.
Absolutely. All right, we have one more question here. Let's get into that. So in these scenarios you've shared, paper-based or electronic comes from several sources. Who in the ecosystem is best positioned to take the lead and own the IoT solution? And will the various players share the data with this owner? That's actually a really good question in terms of data and how that data sharing happens, right? Maybe Paula, you want to lead us with that?
Yeah, I think it's tough because you do end up with an ecosystem, right? And each part of that ecosystem likely owns pieces of the data. I'm going to go backwards in time. And for anyone who has been in the supply chain space a very long time, and not just logistics, but overall supply chain, you might remember the term CPFR, or collaborative planning, forecasting, and replenishment, right? Came out how many decades ago? But the idea of a manufacturer and a retailer sharing data, right, to make better integrated decisions on how to connect the supply chains together. I go back way far then, Sundar, and back then the questions I got were head nods of, yes, I want to do this. Can you find me a partner who will collaborate with me?
Right.
Fast forward to today, and there's actually still some of that sense of security of sharing data. So you really have to be able to also build it into an entire ecosystem where each player in that ecosystem knows what's in it for them and has the uttermost sense of security of that data, and that it will drive better decisions. So it's sometimes difficult when we're talking supply chain overall in a connected ecosystem as to, who is the one owner, because it takes a lot to actually make it happen.
Absolutely. Steve, any take on that in terms of, I know, especially within the insurance industry, data and data sharing of data, you have to treat that very sensitively. What's your perspective, especially as regards to partners, sharing anonymous data, creating that sort of ecosystem?
Yeah, just want to echo, huge fan of collaboration. Most of us think within our business organizations that we have secret sauce that makes us unique. The reality is that we're all applying similar functions and features. We're just applying them in a slightly different branded way or whatever it may be. But I'm a huge fan of collaboration. With regards to the insurance industry, though, obviously, there's a big difference between the data that we would term to be operational data versus the stuff that's very personal and protected. For that point of view, as long as we've got very clear lines of definition between the two and very clear security policies between the two, the operational data is largely there for collaborating. It's there for sharing. It's there for improving the whole ecosystem for the benefit of everybody within our customer base as well as those elsewhere as well. So, like I say, collaboration is key. The losing of the secret sauce mentality is a big thing we've got to overcome. Got it.
All right, so let's move to the next question here in terms of, are there any statistics or revenue lost to the Port of LA issues? It was obviously very significant. I think at one point there were more than 100, ships waiting to dock. I actually may have, let me see if this works. I may actually have a video that talks about some of those stats. Let me try playing it, and we'll see if this works.
This is not like 30 years ago. There are natural constraints on supply that make today's logistics world very different than yesterday's.
It really requires innovation across almost every aspect. Essentially, the entire supply chain is required to modify to meet the objectives.
The number one reason that many companies fail is they miss market transitions. Are you going to be a disruptor or a victim of disruption?
Times like today spawn innovation and opportunity.
E-commerce really turbocharged it. This is not something where you can flip a switch and change it the next day. This takes years and years.
Anyway, so let me remove that stream and get back into this. Those are some of the high level stats. You saw that, again, like I mentioned before, 8,000 trucks or so to take one, ship unloaded. We had at one point, I think, tens of thousands of containers that were just waiting even at the port in itself, ready to be picked up, and they were not. So I can get back, on the actual stat. I'm sure it was probably in the hundreds of billions of dollars just in terms of overall industry impact for this.
Sundar, maybe I could
Yeah.
add just a thought
Sure,
to that.
absolutely.
I don't have a perfect statistic on it, but when we look at it through the lens of really the overall impact of that, right? So take a retailer's point of view who was waiting for product that were on those containers, right? Or a manufacturing, but retail, let's think of it through us as all consumers. A lot of that product might have been seasonal based, meaning it's not arriving in time. You miss the entire season. So now what does a retailer do with that? We have the, do I sell stuff at a discount? Do I hold it? What's the holding carrying cost to hold it for another year? Is it clothing that will be out of style and I totally missed everything and now I'm just getting rid of it and depleting it? So the overarching impact and the ramifications that this had is huge, right? And it's the traditional bullwhip effect that we all know in supply chain, right? We didn't have enough product on the shelf. So what happened? Everyone overbought. It jammed through. We couldn't get it in time. We finally got it. Now you go and you sell that on clearance and the demand's not there. So the overall impact, it just continues to explode.
Definitely a great point. Yeah. The next question is, does asset management help from an insurance supply chain perspective, driving down the cost within that industry? So I think the larger question here, Steve, is are the supply chain industry leveraging sort of devices within for example boxes to tell if there's been an impact, or using that to negotiate insurance costs?
Well, certainly with regards to crash detection and all those sorts of things, it's a huge buzz around the insurance industry, has been for a few years now. We're looking at many ways and many sensors to help us to identify when a crash has been identified, even if it's just your wing mirrors being clipped whilst you were parked up outside a store somewhere. We're seeing all the rates of the impacts with that. The impact that the detection has in the first instance is quite significant in terms of insurers. However, when you're able then to do a full crash reconstruction over a serious loss, maybe even loss of life incident, then that's where the real benefits of the IoT, the connected claims, all that sort of stuff comes to the fore as well. So there's lots of ways that it's helping to improve operating ratios of a number of the world's largest insurers. And as I say, there is mobile only claims, there is Bluetooth tethered devices, there is actually the hardwired devices in vehicles as well. There's many ways to achieve a claims detection, but then there's various grades with regards to the quality of the data that they can then sort of summarize in order to furnish what the full crash would look like. But yeah, it's significant. There's lots more work to be done on that within the industry. But yeah, we're at IMS, we're very confident in our solutions that we're building and bringing to market. And we've already seen some real life cases where it's helped to improve the operating ratios of the insurers themselves.
Got it. Yeah, and I think it's also key, right, in the sense that if they are able to leverage IoT and, to your point, be able to kind of look at some patterns, then Paul, I'm assuming that they can then push that data. They don't necessarily, if they have enough of a sample set, they could possibly even just go and say, for this particular route, we're going to see X impacts overall just from looking at the data and kind of leveraging machine learning models and things like that. What I'm trying to say is that not every single asset necessarily needs to have, sensors or things like that. Eventually, you can start using the data to get that insight.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think as we collect and gather that data, that opens up those exact points, Sundar, is how do I utilize that data for more of an aggregate planning opportunity? And I think also tying into, you mentioned routing. So let's look at it through the lens of an actual, something's going to be routed. And if we tie that to cold chain related products, right? Whether we're looking at healthcare vaccines or we're talking about fresh fruit, vegetables, meat, those types of things, tying together external signals of weather with the IoT tracking devices can allow you to do like real-time tracking and avoid certain routes where things might not jive very well together by tying those together. So there's multiple ways to utilize that data, both from an aggregated level, from a planning perspective, as well down to the operational level.
Absolutely. All right, I think we can take one more, and I think this question may be more relevant for you, Steve, in terms of to build on that last question and the example that you cited. Can you quantify the cost savings for the insurance companies? Are they passing lower rates to companies using the IoT solution versus not using? I think this comes down to the whole driver, the gig economy, as you can call it. Like you mentioned, the maybe the use case of on demand. Are they leveraging these devices to then get lower costs overall?
So price discrimination is certainly something that I'm sure the insurance industry would want to take off the table entirely. Reality is, though, that a number of us may already be familiar with telematics-based, usage-based insurance, either just from our personal lives or for some of us with commercial lines as well, would see the impact. What we see is that the data, the driving behaviour scores, particularly in North America, it's very prevalent. They will help to influence the size of discount that you may earn and qualify for upon your next renewal. Over in the UK, some of it can be even more severe. Bad driving behaviour can actually result in a policyholder's insurance policy being cancelled entirely. So there's two ends of the spectrum there, but the baseline premium is often it's rated based on the risk that they view, where telematics then is able to enhance that view further to, as I say, afford additional discount. So not discrimination, Dennis, but certainly something that good driving behaviours can help to improve your insurance premiums.
Awesome. I think we're at the end of our broadcast here. I think there's a question here in terms of, is there going to be a recording of this? Absolutely. It's going to be available on YouTube. I'll go ahead and share it on the LinkedIn stream also on the original post. But I do want to say thank you, Paula. Thank you, Steve. That was great insights. Super excited to see what comes out of this industry, and especially in terms of leveraging IoT. And thanks again.
Thanks so much.
Thanks.
Thank you. Take care. Bye.